favorable, or whichever your however your ground is, it affects your design. So you should look at about that.
One reason why engineers are not involved in building projects usually are the costs that are associated with privately hiring an engineer. So yes, I mean during the week we've talked about this a bit with some of the other professionals who've come, many of the architects, that you have large projects, and with large projects, maybe your estates or your office complexes, they would easily involve all the kinds of engineers that we need. But on a personal level, at an individual level, individuals don't usually go think that the first thing they think about is not really to go and get a geotech engineer to see the kind of foundation that I need or what have you. What are we losing if we don't get the right kind of persons involved in the projects from the very onset? Gertrude?
I think in the first place, most masons come across as professionals, professional engineers and a lot of people don't know engineers. All they know is architects. But then I think engineers have a lot of advocacy to do to enlighten the public of the role engineers play in the building sector. So I think engineers have to do a lot more.
A lot more advocacy. It's interesting that you put it back on the engineers, Joseph, because from what I hear Gertrude telling me, maybe we don't know enough about what you're telling us right now, and that's why we don't even know where to go, for instance.
Well, let me probably also touch on the question that you have asked. It's important that clients or those who want to put up their building think about risk. And if you're talking about risk, you have to look at the professional indemnity. I mean, you're going for somebody who's not really trained to provide certain services in a professional level. You take the risk. And I think you are going to pay more. I've seen some of these small projects you're talking about. And for me, if you look at the way that the construction activities are done, the approaches, they are so bad. They are not too good. And that is a cost to you, the client. So I don't know how much you think of paying an engineer to look for a project for you. And within the engineering fraternity, there are categories. You understand? Somebody putting up maybe a small single house, as a single-story building. You don't need a professional engineer who is over 15 years of experience. A 2-3-year-old professional engineer of experience can help you. How much are you going to pay him?
You can get a small boy engineer.
Yes, I mean, and you see, once these people are trained and they are registered or licensed to practice, they also have a kind of responsibility to ensure that whatever thing that they are putting out there is very good. You understand? Now, I've seen, for example, let me talk about concrete mixing. You see, some of these are people who are not well trained in concrete mixing. Once you add water to cement, to sand and gravels, you are forming concrete.
Yeah.
And you need to mix and place it within 30 minutes. There are times you see these people, they have mixed they've added water to these ingredients, and then they even left it open for more than 1 hour.
Yeah.
And that is not a good concrete. And you see these things being used to build. And you, the client, are you happy? You are not, obviously, you are not supposed to be happy. And it's a cost to you, but you don't know. At the end of the day, should we have a problem on the building, a defect on the who are you going to hold responsible? Is it a mason? Somebody who is not professionally licensed?
Okay.
I mean, so I think that they should look beyond the cost, thinking that pay an engineering professional is expensive. I don't think that is the issue.
Okay. Interesting thoughts there. It's 30 minutes past 8. You're still listening to the Super Morning Show. I am here in the studio with Engineer Joseph O'Day and Engineer Gertrude Awumi. We are talking about how engineers themselves can help us achieve this goal we want of getting affordable housing. So we started by talking about the general role of engineers in a building project, what they do when they come on site, and also about this idea of engineers being very expensive to engage, as are other professionals, I should say. And the important point Joseph has made is that you are saving money in the long run by getting some of these professionals to help you from the onset. I mean, imagine what it would cost if you started building and you realized that your building is what the foundation wasn't started in the right way, and so if you want a 2-story building, you have to start it again. So many different ways that different things you can avoid if you just get it right from the onset. But the idea, I know Gertrude has a word she wants to bring in, but the idea is behind this conversation is about making housing more affordable in the first place. So what can engineers, and Gertrude, I'm coming to you with this one, what support can engineers give to a project of this kind?
What I'll say is engineers, there are different categories of engineers. So I would say by employing the right professional to deal with the different aspects of engineering expertise on the projects, you will cut down costs drastically. Imagine not using a geotechnical engineer. Sometimes you use any type of foundation. Like we have raft foundations, we have typical simple foundations. But then if you have a site which is swampy, waterlogged, and you don't use the right foundation, at the end of building your structure, you see cracks in the building, which I think most people can relate to. So in the long run, fixing that crack is very expensive. So, and we can all relate to the Melcombe disaster. There are some buildings that were not officially designed to be offices or warehouses, but in our environment, building owners easily convert residential buildings into shops and offices. But every building has a typical load for which the building was designed for. So,
and by load, you mean a number of people, a number of things you can put there.
Precisely. So if the building was not designed for that purpose and you load it, you can collapse your building. So I think at every point in time, professionals, structural engineers should be consulted if you want to change the use of your building before you change the use of that building. You should consult a structural engineer.
Or let them know at least from the onset what you're going to use it for.
Exactly.
So that it can be done. So from the way you're speaking, I can see a structural engineer in the I heard a geotechnical engineer marketing himself, so I can't.
I'm not marketing, I was just being biased.
Pick up your invoice at
I was just being biased.
at the front desk where you go. Anyway, so really, when you're a structural engineer, Gertrude. So
Yes.
when you get to a building or when you get to a site and a project is about to begin, the person comes to you and says, "Look, I have maybe 10,000. I want to go as far as I can." You know you're going to build over 4 or 5 years. What advice do you give this person? Yes, I mean, I'm just trying to help the listeners understand that, okay, I have limited funds. I want to build over this number of years. You have to take into consideration the weather, the materials you're going to use, and what have you. What advice are you going to give this person?
First of all, sometimes depending on the use of the building and the number of people in the building, sometimes somebody can build 5-bedroom house, or when the person does not really need it. So what I'll advise the client is you build what you really need in the first place. Then we look at the building materials, how we can limit the cost of building materials. There are areas where you can use dry partitions instead of block walls to reduce the cost. And if it's for residential purposes, sometimes we can use the fast floors, which can be used for residential buildings. But if it's for heavy loaded buildings, that one we can recommend the normal concrete floors. So depending on the use of the building, we can reduce the sizes of the members, the sizes of the kind of materials used for the building. I think
okay.
that can reduce the cost.
So those are the things that make it more expensive, the materials and the designs that you use.
And the land.
Okay.
You know, and if you use a professional will be able to go high to design high-rise buildings instead of
Single story
and
buildings.
all that. So I think the use of professionals is key.
So, Joseph, from what Gertrude is saying, I'm teasing out this issue of the kind of materials used, the design of the structure itself as factors that can make any structure or any project more expensive. Is there anything to add there?
Sorry, before I go on, let me cite an example. Have you been to the Afienya areas before? Afienya, you see cracks on their building. You have a lot of challenges over there. I mean, these are simple buildings, but in terms of maintenance, they're having problems. They're having cracks because they didn't pay attention to, or they didn't seek professional advice. That whole area has expansive soil, okay? And even having the professional telling you that, hey, these are the challenges with such land, it informs you the kind of structure or design that ought to be taken before the building begins, okay? But if you didn't do that and you didn't employ a professional just to give you that simple advice, you are going to pay for it. You see people always hacking and trying to place more on their buildings or their cracks, and it do continue because the foundation is misplaced. Right. Now, coming back to the question, from my point of view, if the land has been properly assessed, it gives you the idea of the kind of structure you can put on it. We will advise you. Then the structural engineer will come in based on the land conditions to put in the appropriate design. You know, typically the cost of some of these building projects, apart from the architect coming out with this, I call it the flesh. The structural engineer is more of the skeleton, okay, which will hold the flesh, right? So the skeleton is very, very important, and the skeleton depends on the ground conditions, right? It depends on the ground conditions. Now, that will determine the kind of concrete you need to, in terms of strength. That will determine the sizes of the iron rods. And you know that definitely the size of the iron rods will influence the cost.
Yeah.
So the cost of material is very important. The cost of the construction technique here, we want to look at techniques that will reduce time. Because the more you lengthen the time, the more you pay. So these are issues we should be thinking about as a nation. If we want to move towards affordable housing, even though, well, in my view, affordable is relative. Actually, it's not specific. Something can be affordable to you, may not be affordable to me.
Well, there's a global standard definition for what affordable housing is.
Exactly.
And that's what we go with in these discussions.
Yeah. So what it means is that we should be looking at the various categories of affordability. And then we can implement whatever buildings to suit any of those categories.
Okay.
Right. So it's very important that we really have this kind of dialogue with professionals, seeking their advice. And before you even take a decision, I even am of the view that, look, if you sought proper advice from, let's say, a geotechnical engineer, it will influence the cost of your land. For example, you want to buy a land somewhere closer within the Accra and say, look, this place is an earthquake-prone zone. You have the 4 structures just around. It means that the structure you are going to put on, the structural engineer is going to design based on seismic condition. And you are going to pay more. So that should influence even how much you pay for the land. Not because the land is at East Legon, so I should buy it for so and so millions of cedis or thousands of dollars. No. If the land is swampy, it should influence the cost.
The cost of the land as well.
And that can factor into the general project cost as well.
Okay. You've already mentioned, Gertrude, some of the ways that you can apply to reduce construction costs, talking about the designs and the material. But what about manufacturing? In your view, do you think engineering can play any role in the manufacturing of building materials in order for Ghana to reduce the high importation of these materials? Joseph, you want to come in with that?
Yes, with that, I think as a nation, we have BRI. You know BRI?
Yeah.
But they should be the focus. in the area of research and development for materials for buildings and materials for roads. And I think for some time now, we have not helped BRI as a nation. So things that they ought to do, they are not really doing them for some time now. And I think it's something that we have to look at, because recently, I think they've come out with this Pozzolana cement.
Yeah.
They have it on the Apam Road thereabout, which is a very good source of construction material. But, I mean, the system really is not using it. Maybe we are not making the noise. So I think BRI is something that we should look at. Tell them that let's encourage them to go on with the various research and development on construction materials, taking into consideration the localities. For example, if you want to put up a building in East Legon, can they cut around and get construction material within an economic distance, okay, to reduce the cost? It also reduces this carbon emission into the atmosphere and to be more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
It's something we have to look at.
But are there any materials that you feel we import now that we shouldn't be importing and we can manufacture, Gertrude?
We import iron rods, especially the high tensile one, which I think can be manufactured also locally. Sometimes nails, data cables, doors, windows. I think some of these products can be supported
For doors and
for
windows,
local.
I don't understand. Because there are carpenters all over there.
I think is the finishing.
Yeah, we need to look
We
at
need
that.
to
That's
look
why
at the
I keep
finished
on saying that
product.
these people ought to be trained. Okay,
The manufacturers.
like the carpenters. We need to professionalize the activities. Okay.
Yeah, I want you to finish that thought you were on about some of the things, and you were talking about the finishing of the doors. That was makes
the finishing, because sometimes when you compare the local ones to the imported ones, you see that most people go for the imported ones. So I think if the expertise is brought in for the locals to learn some of these how to finish the products to the standard of the foreign ones, I think it can also help in bringing down the costs. And certain things like tools for construction, I think they can also be manufactured locally. Nails, data, I think their electrical cables and stuff, they are manufactured locally.
Yeah,
So I
some of
think
them are
maybe
done
the
here.
government can support them to.
This
to
one
bring
district,
down-
one factory is what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of work needs to be done in that area to also support things like this. But do the materials, and Joseph, you're talking about techniques, do they affect the final cost of the projects? Do you think so?
Oh yes, techniques really affect the final cost, because for techniques we are looking at procedures for construction that will reduce time. Okay, in some jurisdiction, depending on the kind of structure you are putting up, some would like to use prefab materials, which will reduce time. Is a technique for construction, so it's something we can look at. I mean, I am of the view that the general built environment people or players should come together and let's decide the way forward. What do we want? What do we want to do? What do we need? Do we have them here? If we have them here, are we really using the human resource to sort of engineer it to come out with useful products or
Okay.
not? In some jurisdictions, you see people using even rice chaff, or wheat chaff as construction material. But the point is that the taste of the typical Ghanaian, if you're going to use some of these materials to put up a building for them, would they like it? It's something that we have to discuss. Yes. So, and some jurisdictions, for example, in our villages, we are using our mud houses. How can we put up very clever finishing touches to these things? Can we do some plastering around and come with a new architectural design for some of those, method of building? We can look at that. So we need to understand affordability depends on how much you have to pay. Yes, so we should look at the various categories of affordability and then discuss with the people.
Okay. It's 15 minutes to the top of the hour. I don't know where the time goes sometimes when we are having these conversations. But unfortunately, we have to wrap up and make way for Corruption Watch. Let me take final comments from Gertrude first, and then Joseph, and then we move on.
I would say we need to employ engineers to supervise our building projects, because I think in the long run you'd rather save a lot of costs in putting up your structure. Yeah.
Great. And Joseph?
Yeah, I'm going to say that the concern that hiring an engineer is expensive should not be an issue. And then also, it appears the system is not really compelled to use professionals in doing X, Y, Z. But now, Ghana Institution of Engineers, we are aware of this, and we are supporting the Engineering Council come up with the regulation to support engineering practice here. We are bringing on board all the technicians, the craftsmen. We want to professionalize their activities. We want to help them, train them, so that at least they'll be top-notch. I mean, if you say you're hiring a service of a mason, the mason can typically display what he or she can do. So engineering is very important. And seriously, as one of my past presidents remarked, Ghana is not going nowhere without engineering. And it's something that the government must look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Engineer Joseph O'Day and Engineer Gertrude Awumi, a geotechnical engineer and a structural engineer. This morning, they helped us understand, as part of our housing conversation, how they can help reduce the costs of housing projects. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. It's 30 minutes at the top of the hour. It's time